Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. But if you're new here, my name's Tyler and I just do consistent content on all things related hockey and the NHL overall. And we are talking about the New York Rangers, my favorite team. And yes, we have Statboy Steven along with us too. If you know him, I hope you do. If you're a Rangers fan, if you don't, make sure to check out our mock draft, even though it doesn't matter as much now. But we did a 2-hour long mock draft, and a lot of them, those picks actually came into fruition. A lot of them were really off. It was fun nonetheless, but we'll be doing a recap of not just the Rangers, but the draft overall. But for this video, we're talking about just the Rangers and their top 4 picks that they have had in the 2020 NHL draft. Obviously, we know with Alexis Lafreniere, the guy on the wall behind me, and a lot of other picks that were somewhat surprising in a sense for the New York Rangers. I'm really excited for this discussion. I hope you guys enjoy this. We'll be breaking down the top 4 prospects that the Rangers drafted in this year's 2020 draft. All right, Steven, here we are. We all knew this was going to happen with Alexis Lafreniere going first overall, but I think it's safe to say for all of us Ranger fans, we didn't expect some of the other picks that transpired throughout these first couple picks for the Rangers, at least. Their top 4 were very interesting out of Lafreniere. So starting off with Laf, there isn't much else to say. I have his stats pulled up right here. He had, of course, 112 points in just around 52 games. Lafreniere is a real deal. This was truly a franchise-altering night for the New York Rangers, in my opinion. I think you could attest to that as well. And it is crazy just looking at the Rangers currently, them buying out Henrik Lundqvist, how upsetting that is. It looks like he's going to be signing now with the Washington Capitals, which is something else, truly. But now we have a situation where Hank is out, and now the Rangers potentially have that next big face of the franchise. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, what else can we say about this? We knew this was coming. The moment we won the lottery, we all knew it was going to be Lafreniere, and there's always some Ranger fans who go, "Oh, what if they go for the other guy?" But this year, that was never going to happen. And there's a video that the Rangers posted on Twitter today of Jeff Gordon having a Zoom call with Lafreniere and his family, and they're joking about having to keep it quiet for so long. So it's obvious that they had this planned out for weeks, and even Lafreniere knew, because Lafreniere said, "Yeah, I struggled to keep it to myself." So they tried to keep it a secret, and I guess it's just good business to keep it a secret because you don't want to scare away a potential trade. And even if they don't trade for Lafreniere, if a team calls you up for a trade, there's always something else you can discuss. But yeah, Lafreniere is a Ranger, and highest pick we've ever had since 1969, since the draft became an open draft where every 18-year-old is eligible.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, now we are finally ready to compete, and the comparison that I've made over the last couple of months is a comparison with the Chicago Blackhawks. The Chicago Blackhawks had 2 top 3 picks in a row in 2006 and 2007, where they got Taves and Kane.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Exactly. And then they added a star winger, an older star winger in free agency, Marian Hossa. We did that with Panarin. And of course, not every comparison is dead on here. I mean, they won their first cup with Antiniemi in net, and they had Duncan Keith, who is much better than probably Jacob Trouba, but Adam Fox could be that player for us. But you need those high picks because you need those players to contribute while they're still on their entry-level contract. And when the Caps won their first Stanley Cup, they both had Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves on their entry-level contracts. And that's how they were able to pay other players like Dustin Byfuglien, and they had Patrick Sharp, who was a contributor on their team, and Boland and Bickle, and later on they fell off a cliff, but they were solid contributors on a team that won a cup in 2010 against the Flyers, of course.
Yeah, no, they had a dynasty. They really did.
Exactly, and this is the closest thing you'll come to a dynasty in a salary cap league. If you win 3 cups in 6 years, that's the closest thing you'll get to a dynasty. Of course, the Penguins won back-to-back, but they never won that 3rd cup. In that same span of a couple of years, of half a decade. And this Lafreniere going to the Rangers is just a dream come true for every Rangers fan. And this is something we've never experienced before. And I was talking to my girlfriend last night, and I said to her, this is one of those moments, one of those where were you when moments, where 20, 30 years from now, you can still tell people where you were when the Rangers drafted Lafreniere. Who were you with? This is such an iconic moment in franchise history, and we should cherish this because it probably won't happen again for many years.
Oh yeah, no, there's no doubting that, especially because when you look at the Rangers now, they go from a team that really been in, this retool slash rebuild stage since 2016, 2017 to now really going to compete heavily starting next season. We're back in a stage for the Rangers where we can really expect them to have later first round picks going forward, in the 20s and for quite some time now, it seems, with not just Lafreniere coming into the mix, but so many other great Rangers, not just with Capo on the wall behind me. And, when you look at this Rangers team, it's really all coming together. The Rangers had such a bright future as it was, arguably the brightest in the NHL outside of like the Avalanche, for example, without even Lafreniere in the mix. So now you bring Laf here and you're like, okay, like this is getting a little obnoxious here. Like this is a lot to take in all at once. It really hasn't fully hit me yet, even from seeing Laf and talking about him plenty of times. I think once he finally plays his first game as a Ranger is where I'm going to be like, oh my God, okay, here we go. I'm simply ecstatic. Words cannot even really describe. When you look at Laf though, he's just phenomenal. What really separates him from the rest in this draft class, for me at least, and what a lot of the scouts believe, is a couple things. Obviously, his size is a huge factor. As you can see here, he's 6'2", 200 pounds. He's a perfectly balanced winner. And he uses his body to his advantage, which is crucial for a guy of his skill level. He isn't easy to get knocked off the puck by any means. He's aggressive. He will go in those corners. He will do everything humanly possible to get the puck on his stick and really command that offensive zone. And that is just phenomenal about him. And while there are plenty of other great players in this year's draft class, no doubt, Alexei just having such a balance and showing a sense of effortlessness with every single thing he does on the ice. He's just 2-3 steps ahead is the best way that I can really explain how he is on another level than, say, the Quinn Byfields and the Tim Stützles of the world. Now that they won't be great, I really hope they are, because they're fantastic young prospects as well. But Alexei has steadily been that number one for for whichever team was going to draft him, and in this case, it was the Rangers. We lucked out big time. I'm just simply ecstatic. And take into account, when winners are drafted first overall, you should not take that with a grain of salt, because that does not happen often as it is. Centermen are normally the most coveted guys to be drafted first overall because they're viewed as the most well-balanced guys. They're the playmakers, they're controlling, they're on the puck constantly with the face-offs, making things happen, going the offensive zone down the middle. They normally have a solid two-way game as well. But Lafreniere has all those attributes as a winner, which is just so impressive. Analytically speaking, he has better metrics and numbers than Nathan MacKinnon did going into his draft year. So just putting some things to perspective, as a winner, Lafreniere is off the charts. And again, I'm just so ecstatic, not just for me, for you, for the entire Ranger and hockey community. This is just the beginning of truly what is going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. I just can't wait. But besides Lafreniere being as ecstatic as I am for him, let's get on to now the second draft pick for the New York Rangers, and Braden Schneider. Now, it's funny because when we had these conversations, when we did our mock draft, I've really been a couple weeks now really hoping the Rangers would go for Hendricks Lapierre. I thought there was a solid chance he would fall to, around the Rangers at 22. Lapierre has dealt with injuries. He's had 3 concussions within this past year. So there are a lot of cause for concerns for him, but we all agree that when it comes to pure talent, he's really up there in top 10. So seeing how the draft transpired, of course, and Lapierre still being available, see the Rangers trade up with the Calgary Flames to get to the 19th overall pick. I'm thinking, oh my God, they're actually going to get Lapierre. I felt I spoke this into existence and it's finally becoming a reality. And Braden Schneider gets picked. When I was doing my live stream, I was shocked by it. Not mad about Schneider, but in the sense of just how baffling it was. I had no idea that the Rangers would go for a defenseman. So Schneider was a very big surprise pick, in my opinion, for the Rangers. It makes a lot of sense looking at it now, but in the moment, I was really hooked on Lapierre, and then he ends up going to 22, which was the pick that the Rangers originally had, because the Flames traded again to the Capitals, and we'll touch on that in the other video. But Schneider, he's the most aggressive and arguably one of the biggest bodied players in this entire draft class, especially when it comes to defensemen. He uses his body extremely well on the boards and very Trouba-esque in a lot of forms of his game. But I would even say he may be superior in his transition game, going from offense to defense and with his back checking. So we'll see what happens with Schneider, but he's 6'2", 202 pounds. And he had 42 points in 60 games this past year in the WHL for the Wheat Kings. He's a leader in the locker room from everything that I've seen. He's been the captain for Team Canada numerous times and juniors for them. And he really impressed the Rangers apparently with his maturity when he got interviewed by them, obviously via Zoom or the phone. So this wasn't all that surprise. And you look at the Rangers situation on that defensive front, it does leave me a little bit wondering if the Rangers are, say, going to make a move on that defense sooner rather than later, bringing in Schneider. But I also am aware that Schneider will probably take 3 to 4 years to come into the league. So my assumption is with the Rangers, they get a guy like Schneider who they really feel could be that next big, great two-way defenseman for the Rangers, more of a shutdown guy for sure to help balance things out with Adam Fox and Niels Lundqvist. And Tony DeAngelo, we'll see what happens with him. I think DeAngelo will stay with the Rangers unless arbitration really does not go in the Rangers' favor, for instance. I think he might sign a bridge deal if he's willing. But long-term, I'm not sure if the Rangers are committing to him. And same could even be said with Trouba down the road with a couple years left on his deal by the time Schneider comes in the league. So I think this was a perfect move for the Rangers, bringing in a guy like Schneider. By the time he comes in the league, there should be a spot for him open in the lineup. But yeah, no, Schneider just speaks for himself. I thought he would really go to the Toronto Maple Leafs possibly at 15 if Askarov wasn't available. So seeing him land to 19 for the Rangers, in which the Devils were really interested in Schneider apparently too. It really looked like that they came in to swoop him away, knowing the Devils had strong interest. What are your thoughts on Braden Schneider?
Yeah, Schneider is a guy that I've seen play regularly because I'm a Seattle Thunderbirds fan, so I watch some WHL hockey throughout the year. He's one of the older players in the draft, and going into the draft, I had a feeling that was going to hold players back. If they are among the older players in their draft class, it's going to have them drop a few spots, but it's like last night was opposite day. Like the older guys in the draft, like the guys born between September 16th and December 31st, we're going a lot in the first round. And you have guys like Jack Quinn is one, Lafreniere is also one, but that's not a discussion. I think Marco Rossi is one of the older guys as well. And I was surprised that Schneider. I was surprised that Schneider didn't go early. And Maka had him late in the first round, but that was more based on team need. But yeah, I mean, he's a player who's already played 3 WHL seasons, which means one more season, and he's eligible for the AHL. Not sure how much that played into the Rangers' decision here, but yeah, it's a draft pick I do not hate. I don't dislike the pick. Although it's not the player I would have gone for at 19. I am perfectly fine with them trading up. I'm perfectly fine with them drafting Braden Schneider. I just wouldn't trade up for a guy like Braden Schneider, considering the depth we have on defense. But if you look at it in a vacuum, Braden Schneider at 19 is a really good value pick because he could have gone as high as 15. And you mentioned going to Toronto to help him on defense. I had Toronto draft Shakir Mukhamadullin, who ended up going to the Devils after we picked Braden Schneider at 19. So there is this idea floating around that the Devils were interested in Braden Schneider, and the Rangers leapfrogged them and picked then Schneider ahead of the Devils. But yeah, Braden Schneider is a good defenseman. A real shutdown guy who's also really good at the transition game. He's a big guy. I've seen comparisons to Jacob Trouba, which was my first comparison, just because it's easy to explain to Ranger fans. But he's better defensively than Jacob Trouba. He might not be as solid in the like offensively, but his transition game, his gap control, he can really be a real good shutdown defenseman. But he's going to need a couple of years, and this is where the pick for me makes sense, because by the time he is a solid contributor in the NHL, and my timeline is about 2023, 24, by that time, you have Niels Lundqvist coming off his entry-level contract. You have Jacob Trouba's no-move clause turning into a limited no-trade clause. So you'll be in a situation where you have much more flexibility on defense. And that Jacob Trouba contract, they're going to move that contract eventually. I don't see Jacob Trouba playing for the Rangers until the end of his contract.
Neither do I. I think
No.
it would seem somewhat foolish to think that. Like at first, when the Rangers sign him, it's like, okay, by the time that contract's done, he's still going to be fairly young, because Trouba's only, I believe, 25 or 26 as of right now. So even at the end of that contract, it's not going to be terrible. But given how much has changed in just 1 year, not just with Trouba's play, because I only think it's so much of a factor as I do everything else that's happened with the Rangers really over this past year, it's only more clear indication that Trouba long term in New York may not be as set in stone as others would perhaps suggest.
Yeah. Yeah, and in 2024, you could have a situation where you trade Jacob Trouba to a team that is really looking for defense on the right side, a team like Detroit that might be up and coming by then. And the cap space that you create with that move would then go to Nils Lundkvist coming off his entry-level contract and a little bit maybe spread around to other players, with hopefully Braden Schneider coming in on his entry-level deal and filling that third pair role, as we hopefully see in the next couple of seasons with Nils Lundkvist. So long-term, the deal makes sense because behind Nils Lundkvist, we only had Hunter Skinner. And I like Hunter Skinner. He's a really nice kid. I met him at the draft. I interviewed him. He's a really nice kid, but the upside is not really there for him, which I don't want to talk bad about players, but we have to be realistic. He's a fourth-round pick. He had an okay season with the London Knights in the OHL. He has a chance to make it, but he's not a player that I would bank on to make an impact for the Rangers. So having a right-handed defenseman drafted to be on the depth chart behind Nils Lundkvist makes sense, even though I would have gone for a different player. I would have gone for a forward because that's also a glaring need, more so than I consider the defense on the right side being a need. But
yeah, no, and
overall,
I apologize. You keep going.
Overall, it's not a bad pick. In a vacuum, it's a really good pick. Considering the Rangers situation, it's a pick that I can live with. It doesn't upset me. So
agreed. And I think what also helps with this too, when it comes to Schneider, is like you said, his shutdown game. I think it'll be crucial for the Rangers, and that's why we'll get into the next player they selected, because they go hand in hand with each other to an extent, with having some more bigger body players in this lineup to help defend everyone else around. But in the sense of not necessarily bringing goons in or anything like that, but just having a solid balance of these two different types of player styles in the lineup. I think that's huge, because by no means is Schneider not skilled. And same can be said with the player that we'll be discussing in a minute. But Schneider, I really do like the pick. I think Lapierre would have been awesome. It almost made too much sense for the Rangers given their lack of center depth when it comes to their prospect pool. So whether it's him or even if it's Maverick Bourque per se, or you can go down the line of some other centers as well, or even Marat, and I'm going to butcher his last name, but you know who I'm talking about. There were plenty of center options for the Rangers at 19. So it was surprising to see them not go down that route, but I do trust in Jeff Gorin and JD. They looked very happy, and JD looked ecstatic in the video I saw them train up to get Schneider. So clearly they have a good feeling about him. And now it brings more of a balance when you look at the Rangers and the prospect pool from both their right and left side. Because when you look at the left side, it is absolutely loaded with prospects, at least. You have, of course, Tarmo, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, Runanen. And you also have the likes of Keandre Miller. These are two guys that could very well be competing for a roster spot next year. I think Tarmo has a better chance right now. But then you also look at other guys like Zach Jones, who I'm a huge fan of. I really think that he has strong potential with the Rangers. And you have other guys, and Ryan Lindgren currently in the lineup as well. They have plenty of guys on the left side. And Matthew Robertson. They have plenty. So on the right, when it comes to the right side, currently, most of them have blossomed, with the likes of Adam Fox leading the way. So with both Nils Lundkvist now and the likes of Schneider, that really helps balance things out. Now, while the center depth would have been nice to be addressed, again, I'm not upset about this pick at all. He seems mature. He seems like a leader, really. And I think he's definitely going to make a very strong impact for the Rangers whenever he comes to the show.
Yeah, and the final thing I want to say about Braden Schneider is that it's another pick from the WHL, quite high for the Rangers. Last May, I wrote an article about Steve Konowalchuk. He's the former head coach of the Seattle Thunderbirds. He worked in the Colorado Avalanche system as, I think, an assistant coach a couple of years ago. The Rangers 2 years ago hired him to be their WHL scout. because the Rangers realized they needed to do something. Their WHL draft picks were not great. Ryan Grubb is, of course, a great example of how
Yeah.
bad their drafting has been. Dylan McElrath is another one.
Oh, don't even get me started on McElrath.
No. And we're not going to go into that, but just to explain that their drafting from the WHL hasn't been a success.
Correct.
And 2 years ago, they hired Steve Konowalchuk, and a year later, his first draft as a Ranger scout in the second round, they go with Matthew Robertson. And honestly, that pick was such a success. He signed his entry-level contract, which you don't really expect from a second-round pick to get an entry-level contract straight out of camp. But he got his entry-level contract, was sent back to the Edmonton Oil Kings, had a stellar season with Edmonton in the WHL. So this pick, another WHL kid, really to me shows their confidence they have in Steve Konowalchuk. So they seem to steer away a little bit from drafting from Europe, which is not a bad thing. They've had some really good players coming out of Europe, but them drafting out of Europe was mostly was mostly a necessity, not necessarily a choice, in my opinion, because they didn't really have the scouting staff for the major junior leagues up in Canada to make a difference.
Correct.
But
they just focused on their strength.
Yeah, but with Steve Konowalchuk, Matthew Robertson, and now Braden Schneider, I think it really is a vote of confidence, like a positive influence to the Rangers scouting staff that he is there and that they trust him to make these picks. That's the last thing I wanted to say about Braden Schneider.
Yeah, and I'll just finish this off quick too by saying that Robertson was projected by many to go in the first round last year. So seeing him not and following the Rangers' lapse in that second round was a fan. I was ecstatic with that pick. I thought it was awesome as soon as I saw it happen. So I think that's also a pairing we may very well see in the future for the Rangers, which will be very enticing with the likes of both Schneider and Robertson. And the Rangers have even done better than that if they didn't trade Joey Keane. Like, he's fantastic too. He very well could make the league next year because he's looked great in the AHL. We obviously got Julien Gauthier in that deal, which made perfect sense for both sides, given the Rangers' defensive depth at the time and also their lack of having some more controllable winners. Gauthier, I'm excited for him. But nonetheless, let's get into the third selection for the New York Rangers. And this is one I'm sure you have quite a bit to discuss when it comes to Will Cooley, because the Rangers didn't originally have this draft pick. It was the LA Kings. The Rangers traded up to get that 60th overall draft pick in the second round and gave up Lias Andersson. What are your thoughts on this from the forefront when you first saw it happen? Obviously, you know Lias pretty well. You've met him numerous times, and you've had nothing but really good connections with him in all the moments that you met him. So I know that you probably have some mixed emotions regarding this, so go ahead.
Well, first of all, we didn't trade up. We traded into the second round. We didn't give up a lower pick to get this.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, so we traded Lias Andersson to the Los Angeles Kings in exchange for the 60th overall pick, which, in my opinion, is a really good deal, and I can live with that. Mm-hmm. Lias Andersson has had an unfortunate start to his NHL career with the Rangers, 66 games, never really flourished, never really worked out for him. And we're not going to go over all the issues with him because I think it's been discussed to death. There's no reason to go into it in detail, but
yeah, I agree.
I'll say that if there's one team in the NHL where I could see Lias Andersson flourish, it is the LA Kings, mm-hmm. because they have the personnel and the system in place to make it a success and to have him adjust to life in North America. I mean, his dad is a scout for the team. His best friend Jacob Moverare, who plays for Frölunda, is a Los Angeles Kings prospect. Oh, okay. They have some other Swedes. Their first 3 picks today were Swedish players.
Oh, yeah.
So they went with Lucas Raymond, Theodor Niederbach, and Helge Grans, I think.
Yes.
So they are sort of building this Swedish contingent down there in LA. But especially Moverare being part of the LA Kings prospect pool and his dad being a scout, they have sort of a safety net when it comes to Lias. So it makes sense for them. It is a low-risk, high-reward investment for them. And for the Rangers, they get something of value. And I think a lot of Ranger fans didn't expect us to get a second-round pick for a guy like Lias Andersson. I think most Ranger fans had given up on his value altogether. and thought that maybe a sixth or seventh round pick would have been the best we could have gotten. So getting a second round pick was great, and what they did with it, I really like as well.
Yeah, me too.
Will Cooley from the Windsor Spitfires in the OHL, really good goal scorer, physical, big guy. Compares himself to Tom Wilson. I hope he plays with that edge, but doesn't go over the line like Tom Wilson does.
Yeah, of course. I think Brendan Lemieux is like down that same road. He compares himself to Wilson that way. It's just a matter of making sure that you're out of the box. When it comes to illegal stuff, you know what I mean.
Yeah. But if he can be a 20-goal scorer in the NHL while bringing some physicality to the game, I love that, and most Ranger fans would love that. And yes, I like technical, gifted players. I like skilled players. I don't hate physical players. What I hate is players who offer nothing more than their physicality.
Oh, of course.
If your physical edge is your defining factor as a prospect, then I'm not interested. But Will Cooley's defining trait is scoring goals, and the size and the grit and the tenacity comes second. That is perfect for the Rangers. The Rangers need goal scoring. The Rangers need a little bit of an edge in the prospect pool. This is just a really good pick at 60th overall. And I've spoken to some guys who are connected to the Rangers organization, and I know that Will Cooley has been on their radar for a couple of months. They liked him. So trading Elias Anderson to the LA Kings and getting a pick that they can use for a player that they were really invested in already, I think is a huge win for the Rangers.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was really ecstatic. I was very surprised, too, that the Rangers lucked out to get a second-round pick for Elias. That is something that I didn't think the Rangers would actually be able to do, just given everything that's happened with him. I didn't think he would have much of any value. I would say, okay, maybe a 4th or 5th round pick, if anything. I wasn't expecting Elias to be dealt.
Yeah, so I will say this. Draft pedigree matters to general managers. A couple of years ago, the New York Islanders traded Griffin Reinhart to the Edmonton Oilers.
Oh, yes, we all know what happened there.
For the 16th overall pick. Griffin Reinhart was, if I remember correctly, a 4th overall pick. And he didn't do anything in New York. With the Islanders, he didn't do anything. But somehow, and I know this is Shirelli, so you should take...
Yeah, I was literally about to say that.
Yeah, you shouldn't use it as the barometer. But still, they gave up the 16th overall pick for a guy who was drafted 4th overall, and the draft pedigree matters. They went for Ryan Strome. They traded Jordan Eberle for Ryan Strome, who was a 5th overall pick. Some general managers are, with all due respect, idiots. Jim Rutherford in Pittsburgh trades a 15th overall pick and a good prospect, Philip Hollander, for Kasperi Kapanen.
The Penn's best prospect.
A trade that I don't understand at all. But, I mean, good for Kyle Dubas in Toronto. He got great value for Kasperi Kapanen. And the Rangers got a second-round pick for Elias Anderson. And interesting enough, an hour after Elias is traded to the LA Kings, the Edmonton Oilers agree to terms on a 2-year contract with Jesse Puljujarvi.
Oh, I know. I was waiting to talk to you about that too. We won't have to deep dive it in this video, but very happy about that. I follow the Oilers as my main Western Conference team. Yeah. I've always been a huge Puljujarvi fan, so I'm ecstatic for that.
Yeah, so it looks like there was some interest in Elias Anderson. Looking at the dominoes falling, I would say they were interested in Elias Anderson. They just wanted a little bit more than Elias in exchange for Jesse Puljujarvi. Mm-hmm. Instead of Puljujarvi, now the Rangers get Will Cooley. This is going to be. I'm happy we didn't draft Caden Cooley in the first round, because that would have been confusing, having Cooley and Cooley.
Or getting Alex Laferriere.
Alex Laferriere, who went to the LA Kings.
Yeah.
Great draft, by the way. But Cooley is a great prospect for the Rangers. Ranger fans should be ecstatic. And I mean, this is what I love. He's a Star Wars fan. And he had an interview on NHL Network going into depth about Star Wars.
Oh, I recall this. Yeah.
I'm a Star Wars nerd. I loved every second of it.
Oh, you're like, sign me up. Where's this jersey at?
Yeah, and I know, right? And this draft has had a couple of great moments. Like the Star Wars Cooley interview is great. Before we go on to the next prospect, I just want to mention these two things quickly from round one. The third overall pick, the Ottawa
Yes,
Senators have
Trebek.
Trebek.
Fantastic.
Alex Trebek announced their pick. Oh my God. I live in Europe and I know what a big deal Alex Trebek is in the US.
Yeah.
And for a Canadian franchise to have Alex Trebek announce their pick, well, it gave me goosebumps. But my number one moment of the draft so far was the 31st overall pick, the
Oh,
San
San
Jose
Jose.
Sharks. They drafted Ozzy Wiesblatt, and the general manager used sign language. This,
Because his mom's
I
deaf.
think, I may have butchered it, but he used sign language to signal to Wiesblatt's mother that they were going to pick her son because she is deaf. I mean, if that doesn't give you goosebumps, then I don't know what will. That was such a beautiful moment. So
yeah, no, it was. There's been a lot of great moments in this draft, and we'll touch on more of that when we actually do the entire draft recap in itself, so we can talk about all these teams. But in a nutshell, Will Cooley, I'm really excited for him. I love the comparison to Tom Wilson. He's another guy who I envision has potential to really be probably most likely a third line left winger. It's not far off from what Brendan Lemieux currently is for the Rangers, but he has size, and that's really important. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. 42 points in 62 games in this past year. And while he hasn't progressed tremendously after his rookie year with Windsor, I still expect him to progress plenty. The Rangers have a much better development group than what they did just a couple years ago. So I really think that he's going to fit well with the Rangers, adding more grit to that lineup for them and helping them around with the other young guns. You know, you're going to need guys to help with the Lafrenières and the Kakos of the world. Not that they can't defend themselves, but it's good to have these guys that can really come in and just cause a constant problem. Having this type of diversity in the lineup is huge. We see it with the Toronto Maple Leafs, for example, struggling mightily to find that diversity in their lineup. And you need a balance of really everything to win in today's NHL. Look at the Tampa Bay Lightning. They had every single thing checked off checking off the boxes. They had everything. They were just so balanced. Yeah. This helps the Rangers balance that. And I love this. Someone in my live stream compared him to Ryan Malone. And I was like, oh, that's a great, I wasn't even thinking about Malone. That's a good comparison as well. But I like Will Cooley a lot. I think he'll be very strong for the Rangers. And I think he will quickly become a fan favorite, like the Lemieux of the world at times, Sean Avery, among others.
Yeah, and I'm surprised Toronto didn't go after this kid. They had their opportunities with some draft picks, but the only downside, if I have to name something negative about Will Cooley as a prospect, is that he has some things to work on before he makes the NHL, first of all. And he's not the type of player that will be on your team for 15, 18 years.
Oh, of course. It's just the type of style he plays.
He'll probably fall off a cliff at age 30. I just hope the Rangers don't commit long-term to him when he's 28, like the Edmonton Oilers did with Milan Lucic. Or to name
or David Clarkson.
Player. David Clarkson, Wayne Simmons. There are tons of examples. Ryan Callahan. There are tons of examples. Brandon Dubinsky, another former Ranger. Tons of examples of players who bring a physical edge to their game on top of their goal scoring and cannot keep it up after 30 because that's just their play style does not allow for longevity.
Oh no, not at all.
That's just something you have to accept when you draft a player like Will Cooley. But,
yeah, no, I completely agree. But I'm very happy about his pick. It was a surprise pick, but a good surprise nonetheless. I'm really ecstatic to see what will happen with him and the Rangers going forward. And if Lemieux is still on the roster by the time he makes the NHL, should he make it. That'll be fun too, seeing if those two actually ever play together.
Yep.
But next up now to the final selection we'll be discussing today is, of course, Oliver Tarnstrom, drafted in the third round by the Rangers, 92nd overall. They would have had an earlier pick, but they traded that away to get the 19th overall pick for Calgary. And Tarnstrom is interesting. It really isn't that surprising to me because I was like, okay, a Swedish centerman. Right before he got chosen, I was like, the Rangers have to go for a centerman here. I'll kind of be baffled if they don't at this point. They bring in another Swede. You know, Carl Hendrickson was recently just drafted by the Rangers. Rangers have plenty of familiarity when it comes to people from Sweden nonetheless and players in the SHL. We all know this. If you look at his numbers here, how I have them shown up at least, well, he's 6 foot, 158 pounds, so he has something that he needs to build, weight-wise, of course. He's still very young, only 18 years old. He played 8 games with IAK in Sweden over this past year and had 0 points. But if you go into his details, which I have on it separately here, he had his most recent numbers is playing in the Super Elite for J20. He had 34 points in 41 games, which is very solid, including 11 goals and 23 assists. I don't have nearly as much of a background on him as I'm sure you have, so please go ahead and expand it to the best of your abilities.
Yeah, Oliver Tarnstrom comes from a hockey family, first of all. His father, Dick Tarnstrom, played in the NHL, played for, I think, the Islanders, Penguins, Blue Jackets.
He sounds familiar.
I might be missing a team there. Oilers as well. And then went on to play in Switzerland and finish his career in Sweden. Oliver was born in Sweden, grew up in Switzerland, played for Lugano in Switzerland as a kid, which is an interesting trajectory. And I hope I have a chance to talk to him in the next couple of months to do an interview with him, because that's one of the things I would like to ask him about, what it's like growing up in another country. But yeah, he grew up in a hockey family, so he's been around that environment, which I know is something the Rangers love. The Rangers love their bloodlines. If you look at the last couple of drafts, they have drafted some players who have either a father or an uncle or a cousin who has played in the NHL, or at least at a very high level. He is a solid two-way center. He's not going to wow you with his dangles. He's not going to put up 30, 40 goals in the NHL, but his upside is a solid two-way center in your middle six, so second or third line. And this is the first center the Rangers drafted today. And I know Ranger fans were very annoyed by the fact that they went with a defenseman and then they went with a winger, but now they finally have a center, so it's all good. But yeah, he's a player that needs a couple of years. He plays in Hockey Allsvenskan, which is the second tier of Swedish hockey, which I just quickly want to explain for everyone. It's not minor league hockey. It's just in Sweden, you have a tier system with promotion and relegation. And sometimes players don't get to choose whether or not they're playing the SHL. Oliver Ekman-Larsson never played in the SHL because the team that he grew up with throughout the academy was just playing at the lower level after they were relegated. So don't put too much weight on the fact that he doesn't play in the SHL. He still plays pro hockey. This is his second season playing pro hockey. I think he played a total of 10 games now. So this is a kid that I expect a lot from this season in terms of development. And yeah, the Rangers finally going with a European player in was it the fourth round, this one? Or
end of
the third. End of the third.
Oh, 90 okay. Yes, pardon me.
Yeah. End of the third round, they finally go with a European player.
92nd overall.
92nd, yeah. They finally go with a European player, second last pick in the round. And yeah, he's a little bit of a project. He's going to take a couple of years to get ready, but knowing the Rangers and their familiarity with the Swedish hockey system, I'm confident that they will be on top of this. And it's nice to have a center prospect in Sweden other than Carl Hendrickson.
Yeah, no, and yeah, that's great to have your input. I really appreciate that. Yeah, when Oliver got picked, I was like, okay, I think this makes perfect sense. And if you're saying if his, given what your description is of his overall play style, where would you say rank him along the likes of being, and this has nothing really to do with the Swedish aspect as it has to do with the play aspect with Jesper Fast. Fast is on the wing, as we know. But when it comes to overall play style, do you view Oliver as possibly being that kind of glue guy where if you have him really anywhere in the lineup, possibly, whether it's 2 through 4, you can see him do fairly well. He won't wow you in any way, but he won't make that line worse. If anything, he will just add to it.
Yeah, and he played on a very disappointing team last year. AIK was underwhelming in at multiple levels. But he still produced. He was consistent throughout the season, which is a really good sign for a player that young, that he can stand out even if the team is not playing well. And similarly, K'Andre Miller had a season like that in Wisconsin. The Wisconsin team was bad, but he was still able to put up a good performance. And that is something you really want to see from your players, that they don't get dragged down in the bad play of the players around them. But he has great energy, leadership qualities, which some Ranger fans might roll their eyes now because the last Swede we drafted with leadership qualities was just traded to the LA Kings. But yeah, I mean, he's a player that will take a couple of years to get ready.
For sure.
But if everything works out, I could see him be production wise a player like Artem Anisimov if everything clicks. Um, so 40, maybe 45 points
That would
on
that would
top
be that would be perfect for the Rangers if that is
on
the
top of
case.
really good two-way play as a center. I mean, there has been some talk about the Rangers going after Philip Denno.
Yeah,
Philip
I've
Denno,
spoken
of
on that
course, is
before.
is one of the best two-way centers in the league, top
Hmm.
10 in Selke voting in back-to-back seasons.
Yeah, he was
That's not
seventh in
some,
Selke last year.
yeah, seventh and sixth or seventh and eighth in the last 2 years. That's not what you should expect from Tarnstrom, but that is the type of player that he could be.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to him too. Obviously, these guys are going to take quite some time, but I'm glad that they got a centerman nonetheless, at least before they would say hit rounds 4 or 5. But I'm pretty happy with that overall with this Rangers draft. Even though we just talked about the just the 4 picks, I think overall this has been a strong draft for the Rangers. I really love what they did outside of Lafreniere for the most part for what we discussed. I really can't complain on any fronts here. And while, like I said, Schneider was a surprise pick, it wasn't a bad pick. And I think that is the biggest thing to take away. And same thing with bringing in the likes of Cooley. I think he's going to be really an interesting prospect for the Rangers going forward. And now look, we're in a situation with the Rangers now where everything changes starting this upcoming season. I don't know what I should set the bar as to what we can expect from them going forward, but they're definitely going to be contending for playoffs. We're going to see Alexis Lafreniere. My assumption probably start out on that third line. I don't think he'll ever hit fourth line. I think he'll stay on that third line unless he truly amazes in camp and Quinn's like, okay, I got to put you in the top 6. And this is assuming that no trades happen for the Rangers, but we all know they will. So whether Kreider gets slid down on that left wing to the third line or possibly moved to the right wing if, say, Fast is gone, these are things to take into account too. So I think Lafreniere will be in that top 9, no doubt. I expect the Rangers to make moves this offseason. I think that there is really something brewing with Strome. I'm curious as to why they took so long to give him a qualifying offer. I know they did the same with Philip DiGiuseppe, but nonetheless, I think that there's something going there. Gordon has voiced his thoughts as being interested in possibly going the avenue for a centerman. I think it's just a matter of will they actually try to go hard for a 2C and part ways with Strome, or they say looking for a depth centerman in the bottom 6 per se. Like Kyle Turris was just bought out today, for example. You take him into consideration among some others. So I'm not sure what the Rangers are going to do, but I expect a lot of traction to happen throughout the remainder of this week. And I'm looking forward to also the video coming out with you doing a full draft recap. So thank you again, Steven. This has been a lot of fun. If you want to give any closing thoughts and your handles, of course, by all means, go for it.
Look, the last thing I want to bring up is the fact I'm a little bit surprised, pleasantly surprised, by the fact that the Rangers have been going with players, their first 3 players, Lafreniere, Schneider, and Cooley, who all bring that physical edge to their game. Mm-hmm. Without going for players where their physical edge is their number one attribute. Like Braden Schneider is not a Dylan. Braden Schneider is not a Dylan McElrath. Alexis Lafreniere is not a Tanner Glass, for instance.
Yeah.
These players bring their hockey sense, their hockey quality, their talent first. But on top of that, and especially Braden Schneider, if you look up some highlight videos, you'll see what I'm talking about. But he doesn't shy away from handing out some jabs. And there was this one instance with I think it was the under 18s or the Ivan Linka tournament where he played against Carl Hendrickson, and he jabbed Carl Hendrickson in the stomach. So we may have a new feud on our hands with 2 prospects similar to what we had with Buchnevich and Brady Shea.
That iconic photo, never forget.
Butch carried
on Shea.
At the World Juniors, yeah.
So you're telling me Schneider's going to get traded fairly young into his career? Don't say that.
No.
I'm joking.
No, I'm pretty sure Carl Hendrickson will get over it. But yeah, it's interesting that they go with a different approach this year, and I'm looking at the guys they drafted in the 5th round, by the way, with their next 2 picks. Yeah, even though there were some players that I would have picked ahead of some of the guys they got today, overall I'm quite happy with the direction they're going.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, I really do think that we're going to see some traction. And this is not me biasly saying. It seems kind of inevitable at this point that there can be some moves of the Rangers going forward before next season. And the rest of this week is going to be hectic, as we all know. The qualifying period stopped today, so Strome cannot be a UFA, so he's still controlled. It's just a matter if the Rangers, do they reach a deal with him and say arbitration, because that's most likely going to happen, or do they deal him off? And then tomorrow, Thursday, is the end of the buyout period, and then Friday is start of free agency. So going to be a hectic remainder of this week in the NHL and for the Rangers. So keep an eye out. I would really say with the likes of Strome and D'Angelo. I don't think Tony's going anywhere unless they really have a stalemate in arbitration, which is a possibility at the end of the day. But if there's any guys that really stand out to me outside of fast-hitting free agency, Strome is definitely the guy I'm looking at. But it'll be interesting to see how the Rangers pan out for the remainder of this week and this offseason. And if anything drastic happens regarding them, I'm sure that we'll have a discussion again. But nonetheless, thank you so much, Steven. I really appreciate you. And if you want to put your handles again for your Twitter and everything, by all means, go for it.
My Twitter handle is statboy_Steven. There's a link to my podcast in my Twitter bio. It's called Under Review. We discuss mostly Ranger stuff, but I tend to go a little bit more in depth on CBA stuff if that's what people are interested in. It's sort of my thing. CBA is my Bible. I like reading it when I'm bored, and it's interesting to know the business side of hockey. Sometimes I enjoy the business side of hockey more than the actual games.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it is definitely an interesting aspect to look at things between the CBA and just escrow in general. But I mean, if that's stuff that you can fully grasp and understand, then it really gives you a better understanding with a lot of the inner workings that happen with management and their decisions in the NHL. But that's really cool. But yeah, no, thank you again, Steven. Go ahead.
If you don't mind, I quickly want to touch on one thing here.
Sure.
Regarding the performance bonuses, which was touched on by Larry Brooks as well. And this is something that's in the CBA.
Oh, yes.
So Alexei Lafreniere, Capo Caco, Igor Shesterkin, and Adam Fox will combine for a maximum of $9.2 million in performance bonuses next year. If they all hit their bonuses, or you can only have 7.5% of that going over the cap, which means that's 6.1 million, which means the Rangers need to have at least 3.1 million in cap space to have a safe cushion in case those players hit their performance bonuses. So yes, technically we have 23 million in cap space, but in reality it's only 19.9 million because you need that 3.1 million cushion. So
Good point, for sure. Yeah, I think the bonuses will be key for the Rangers, and I think that will ultimately lead them into their decisions that are surely going to come with the likes of the players that we've discussed. But yeah, no, this was awesome. Thank you again, Steven. I look forward to doing the video on the draft recap. And for you watching, make sure that you stay tuned for that as well. It should be coming out shortly after this video that you see. But thank you again, Steven, and I'll talk to you soon.